welcome to Nothing New Under the Sun. This is your host, Michael. In the annals of history, there exists a tapestry woven with threads of enigma, mystery, and intrigue. So journey with me into the depths of antiquity, where the whispers of forgotten empires echo through the time, and the shadows of ancient migrations cast cryptic silhouettes upon the sands of our ages past. So imagine, if you will, a world shrouded in veils of uncertainty, where the Aryans embark on their fateful odyssey, crossing vast expanses in search of new horizons. Concurrently, the Ammonite Empire casts its imposing shadow over the lands, its legacy etched into the annals of ancient lore. Yet amidst these epochs, a veil of obscurity envelops the land of Egypt, where the Hyksos shepherd kings rise to prominence in the north. Their origins veiled in mystery, their rule a testament to the enigmatic currents that swirl beneath the surface of history. And looming over the grandeur of Thebes stands the god Amun, his presence both revered and feared, his origins lost to the sands of time. But could there be more to the intricate tapestry than meets the eye? Could the tribe of Benjamin, nestled within the folds of ancient lore, hold a key to unlocking the secrets of our past? As we dive deeper into the annals of time, questions beg to be answered. Who were the ancient Egyptians truly? Is it justifiable to label them as such? Or does such nomenclature oversimplify the rich tapestry of their existence? Consider this. Would we dare reduce the Babylonians or the Sumerians to a mere geographical moniker, labeling them as ancient Iraqis? The very notion seems preposterous, and yet do we not commit the same injustice when we confine the legacy of Egypt to the constraints of a single name? So join me, listeners, on a voyage of discovery as we unravel the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of antiquity. For in the depths of history, there truly nothing new under the sun. Welcome back to Nothing New Under the Sun. This is your host, Michael. You know, the one thing that drives me mad about history is we have a bad habit of imposing our current structure of society onto the past. And what I mean by that is, and I'm not part of any organized religion, but if you ever listen to an archaeologist or an Egyptologist talk about the Exodus, for instance, they say if people from Egypt went all the way over to Israel and took hundreds of thousands of people back to Egypt into slavery for 400 or 500 years, and then those people escaped, lived into the desert for 100 years, that leaves a mark. You couldn't hide that. That's going to have archaeological evidence all over the place, and they're right. There's one huge flaw with that assumption. When you're talking about a Bronze Age kingdom, mostly 99% of the population of the world lived in small groups of maybe 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people in a small walled city. You had a couple places on Earth like maybe Sumer, Babylon, that had maybe anywhere from 10, 15, 20,000 people, but that was it. Everyone else, you lived in a small, rocked, walled city with a few thousand people. Your military might have had 800, 1,000 soldiers if they're lucky. So it wouldn't have been that. When you're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 people max, when you're talking about the Exodus, slaves, that's all. There's no place on earth where you're going to find hundreds of thousands of people in one place. It just doesn't exist in 1600 BC in the Mediterranean area. Hell, it doesn't exist anywhere. So tonight we're going to go talk about the Hyksos. Around 1750, 1800, a group of people moseyed on into northern Egypt, where the delta is. There's a tomb where you can see this, dated about 1700 BC. They refer to these people as Amo, or God's people, and they have donkeys. They introduced chariots and horses and better bronze, the composite bow, better grains for bread, and it wasn't an invasion. It was just either an invite or they asked if they could come. Now, the people's life in the north got substantially better with these improvements in their lives, and they took a natural leadership role and then placed their own king in the north. Now, the people in the south would be the 17th dynasty, Senusret. You're talking about the gentleman, the mummy with a hatchet hole in his head, you can't miss him, and his two sons, which were Kalmos and Amos. I think Amos is listed as the first king of the 18th dynasty. Now, the Hyksos name is a short abbreviated word of a much longer Egyptian word, which basically means foreign scepter, foreign ruler. It just means that, and in those days, foreign didn't mean what it does today. It's not like China came over there. It was the people that you would consider a Hyksos could be just a simple tribe from 20 miles away. If your king isn't ruling you, if you're ruled by another king, that king would be a Hyksos king. Because I've seen that hieroglyph thousands of years later on the Merneptah stela, because he went into the land of Canaan, defeated Ashkelon, Ashdod, which are part of Egyptian territory. There weren't foreigners, and that symbol was used there as well. So I don't buy that Hyksos were people from thousands of miles away, some new people that came onto the scene. I don't think you would have told them the difference between anybody else. There would have been very little difference between them and the other people that lived around them. But the question is, who were they? So who was the dominant power at the time in the region? And you had, of course, the Ammonite Empire. Now, the Ammonites came into power around 2000 BC, and which matches the dates for the Aryan migration coming out of the Black Sea region, going into India, China, into the Middle East. And we know from India that they introduced words such as the chariot, wagon wheel, etc., into the Hindu language that did not exist before. So we know those people are the ones who introduced those objects to that region. So it seems very logical that they would introduce it to Egypt as well. And that's what the record shows as well. There are no horses in the historical record or in the archaeological record before the Hyksos' arrival. So it's a safe bet that they're the same group of people. But something else has happened at around 2000 BC as well. In Thebes, we get the first Amun temple. Now, the question is, Hyksos were called Amo. The Ammonites were called Ammonites. And the people in Thebes worship Amun. The question we have to ask ourselves, are these one and the same people? Now, I know that the priests from the tribe of Benjamin, one of the tribes of Israel was called Benjamin, and they're the ones that gave King David his first kingship via the Bible over the king of Israel. And the priests were called Ammonites because of the name Amen. Amen. Now, Amen is all over the place. We have Amen Ra, we have Ammonites, we have Amos people in Egypt. And the question, I mean, this is a really heavy question. I mean, the gravity of the answer would go far and wide. Why do we call people ancient Egyptians? I mean, why don't we call them by what they call themselves or their contemporaries called them? I've seen countless letters writing those people, and they called him King of Mizraim. The Persians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians all referred to that land as Mizraim. The only people who don't say Mizraim are current Egyptologists and the current head of antiquities in Egypt. And the question is why? If you control the message and you're saying the wrong thing, over and over and over again, there has to be a reason behind that. It doesn't make any sense. You don't go to Mexico City to go visit ancient Mexicans. You go to see the Mayans. You don't go to Baghdad to go see Sumerians and Babylonians. You go to see, that's what I meant. You don't go see ancient Iraqis. You go in there to see the Babylonians or the Sumerians. You are not a Turkologist if you're an expert on the Hittites just because it's in Turkey. So we have a rule of thumb. We do not call ancient people by their modern name, except if it's Egypt. There is not one mummy, not one pyramid, nothing ever in the history of Egypt, from Narmer to Cleopatra, that would be referred to as Egyptian or Egypt. The word comes from a Greek word, Agepius and Neleus. And the Greeks were blown away because you have this river that flows through a desert, and it overflows every year and drops deposits in this dark soil. You can grow anything you want. So they referred to the soil as Agepius, and if you scoop the water into a cup, that would be Neleus. Now, when Rome took over, instead of having individual names for the whole region, they just stuck with that name, and they called the whole region Agepius, just like the same way they called the individual city-states of Greece individual names, because each had their own name, but they had a close relationship with one of them called Greasy, as in pork chop, greasy pork chop. And when you hear Greco-Roman, you're referring to that city-state, Greasy. And over time, the whole region just became Greece, and the whole region over there became Agepius, and then translations in different languages, it becomes Hey, this is Michael with Nothing New Under the Sun. Well, we hope you had a really great podcast today. We did tons of research for you guys, and it still has some questions that need to be answered. I have some follow-up podcasts that are really going to blow your mind to discuss the different temples in Egypt, the temple in Thebes, the Amun temple, the Amun temple, the Aten temple, the Giza Plateau Temple, and then the Ptah Temple in Memphis. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these pharaohs' names will be related to one of those temples, like Merneptah, or Thutmose at the Giza Plateau, or Akhenaten at the Aten, or Amenhotep at the Karnak. The question is, are they individual kings, or is it one king who gets a name at each temple? I just believe that we're looking at it the wrong way, and we have lots of evidence that is going to blow your mind. It's going to shock you, actually, into... Should I give you a hint now? Yeah. The Crusaders are the ones that found Jerusalem. And what I mean by that is, if the reason why Jerusalem is where it is today is because the Crusaders landed there 1,000 years ago and put that flag there and said, this is Jerusalem. From that moment on, that has been Jerusalem. The question is, was that the same Jerusalem that Rehoboam ruled from, King Solomon's son? Look up Jerusalem as a person who's going to visit as a tourist, and tell me if you go to any sites dated before the 1st century of the Jesus story. You will not see any archaeological evidence from anything before that. There is nothing about David, nothing about Solomon, nothing about any of those people. And my suspicion is that it's not the right location. My suspicion is that Rome, when they destroyed Jerusalem in 72 AD, no one was allowed to live there anymore. But the people who left had to go live somewhere. So they would have marched for hundreds of miles and they would have stayed somewhere. I believe that is where Jerusalem is today. And all those little bone boxes they find over Jerusalem and Israel are all dated for 100 years of time. And it's all late 1st century. And they just thought it was a trendy way of burial. That's the only conclusion they can come up with. But there's one other conclusion. That is not the right location. And the Crusaders would not have known. They wouldn't have had. There's no Google. There's no photography. There's nothing. They were cooped up in castles for the last 1,000 years because of the Roman Empire. And then you had the Dark Ages. The weather was cooler, so the crops weren't very abundant until about 1000 A.D. And the weather warmed, and better crops equals wealth, and that's when they had the opportunity to go crusading. And it's not like any of them had been there before. They knew vicinity, they knew the area, but they would have had to hire local guides to get to the exact location. And my opinion is they just went to the wrong location. But we're gonna work on that together. And I'm telling you, subscribe to the podcast, and we're going to do at least one or two every week. So sooner or later, we're going to get through this, and it's going to be quite an eye-opening experience. So once again, thank you so much for joining in, and have a great night.